Fear Not, Episode 35. Before the show begins, I just want to let everybody know that many of the guests have donated current copies of their books, and we'll be giving them away for free. If you'd like an opportunity to win one of these books, visit the giveaways page at livingbeyondyourfears.com. Each competition only lasts 7 days, and it's totally free to enter, so do it today. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show today. Today, you and I are going to be joined by David Gray. Hey, Dave, how are you today?
I'm great.
Dave Gray is a leader and manager with a background in design. He has worked with many of the world's largest companies, as well as mid-sized businesses, startups, executives, and individuals. He is the founder of X-Plane, a strategic design consultancy, and a co-founder of BoardThing, a collaboration platform for distributed teams. He is the author of multiple books, including Game Storming, a playbook for innovators, rule breakers, and change makers, and Liminal Thinking, create the change you want by changing the way you think. Dave, can you take a few minutes to fill in the gaps and maybe give us a brief glimpse of your personal life as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've always identified as an artist, I guess you could say, first and foremost. I was always drawing ideas as a child. I went to art school. I got a job at my first kind of career job was working as an information designer at newspapers. So I was a kind of a journalist, a visual journalist for many years. And then I started my company, X-Plane, which is all about kind of the passion that I developed for explaining things visually. I'm finding any topic that's complex or potentially confusing can usually be clarified if you can make a picture of it. And that's something I learned in the journalism world. And it's something that I've been applying for the last 20, 25 years to mostly large-scale organizational change, rolling out new processes or strategies where things are, that might seem very abstract or complex can be made much more clear, simple, and easy to understand by making a picture of them. So I've always been a person who processes information from the world and translates it into pictures, and I've really just built a life around that. And the books that I've written are probably in the same category. They're areas, topics that I found personally complex or confusing or difficult to understand, and I sought to learn and understand them myself. And, one of my, I guess, passions in life and one of my strengths is being able to learn about a complex topic in such a way that I could then explain it to people like me who need to see a picture in order to understand things, or need sometimes it's a verbal picture.
Well, great. Thank you so much for sharing. And I was hoping that you could explain today a little bit more about your book, Liminal Thinking, and its concept. And I know that the arching premise of the book is that beliefs form the basis of everything that people say, think, and do, and that you also believe that when people change their beliefs, that they change their behavior, which in turn changes their life. And I was hoping that maybe you could explain that a little bit more to us today.
Yeah, I mean, liminal is an interesting word. It comes from, it's primarily used in anthropology. It's not a word that most people have heard of. Although they've heard of subliminal, which is below liminal, or in other words. But liminal is simply a word that means threshold, and liminal periods and times and places are places and times where change is is happening. So if you think about all the periods in your life, there are times when Most of a lot of life feels pretty stable, but there are times when things feel very unstable. And these are what anthropologists will call liminal periods. So, for example, you leave home to go out and live on your own. That's a liminal time period. That's a period of great change. And you get married or you move in with somebody. That's a period of great change. You change careers or you change jobs. You move from one job to another. These are liminal times and places in our lives. And the idea behind liminal thinking, this book that I wrote, is that you can actually, if you feel stuck or you feel like you're in a place where you really need some change in your life, you can intentionally create liminal space in your life to make it more possible for you to see opportunities, to see doors that might potentially open for you. You can actually make that happen intentionally.
So, why do you think that this concept of belief and thought, which is not new, I mean, Buddha, Christ, I mean, even more recently within the last 100 years, you've got like Dorothy Quigley, Claude Bristol, and James Allen, that the way that you think is the way that your life is going to be. Why don't you think that people really, we're not all living according to our thoughts in a positive way? Why do you think we still kind of live in fear or in doubt?
Well, I want to make a distinction between positive thinking and liminal thinking. I think that they're subtly different, and I think it's maybe an important distinction to make. Positive thinking is the idea that by thinking positively about your life and your circumstances, you can create positive change in your life and circumstances. And I think to some degree that's true. But I think I read one of Edward de Bono's books. I think I read. He said something along the lines: if you were locked in a jail cell, or if you're locked in a room, would you rather have the power of positive thinking, or would you rather have the key that opens the door to the room? And I think most people would say, yeah, you can be in a jail cell and you can think positively, but the key would be better. But I'd rather have the key. And liminal thinking, the way that I think about it is, it's very much about, it's not necessarily the idea that you can think positively and think yourself out of a situation, but it is the idea that you can pay attention to the circumstances and the situation, and you can overcome some of the biases that we might naturally have to take a more clear-minded look at the situation. We all have an ingrained tendency to tell ourselves the things that we want to believe, and positive thinking in its more maybe in a way to be something to be cautious about in the concept of positive thinking is that we have a tendency to lie to ourselves. We have a tendency to tell ourselves things that we want to believe, or to talk ourselves into things because we want to believe them. And positive thinking can be dangerous if it works in that way.
So I know that in your book, that is a topic that you sort of touch in, and is how to get in touch with your ignorance. That's one of the many 9 practices. So maybe you could help us to understand how we can avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking, okay, so we've got, let's say you're stuck, you're in a situation. Let's take personal relationships. Most of us have personal relationships, and if you think about how you achieve any kind of results in life, some things that you do directly, but a lot of the things that you achieve in life, let's say your career, let's say your marriage, your raising children, or what have you, that you're doing these things not just through your own efforts, but through the collaboration and teamwork and efforts of other people. And that's how most of the goals that we want to accomplish are accomplished through relationships. So I think it is very important to think about, all right, let's say you're in a relationship and you feel stuck, or you've get in a fight with somebody or an argument. I've seen a tremendous amount of angst and arguments on Facebook since in the last few months since the election, specifically. And Just this morning, a friend of mine posted, my mom unfriended me on Facebook. uh, this feels awful. And, of course, all of his friends rallied to his side. But that's a situation, that, probably a lot of people can identify with. And what do you do when that happens? What do you do when you're in a situation with a family member where one or a friend or a spouse where just one of you has decided that it's just not even worth having a conversation? That's a stuck moment, right? What do you do about that? And what I would suggest is that my friend is probably going to get a lot of sympathy and empathy from his friends, but those things may not help him actually address the true conflict that he's having with his mother. And that if he really wants to address that, he's going to have to examine not only what his mother says, but his own beliefs and his own reactions. Why is she reacting in the way that she's reacting to whatever he's saying? And does he truly want to understand where that reaction is coming from and why that's happening? I think these are things that, we have emotional reactions when we get in disagreements. And one of the things that's easy to get angry with somebody, right? And it's easy to say, oh, well, that person is crazy, or they're just an idiot, or they're a jerk, or whatever we might say. What's harder is to examine your own complicity in that. And I think what I'm trying to get people to think about with liminal thinking is that we can look at these things a little bit more like a scientist would, try and be a little bit more objective. I mean, we know we can't be. We know that nobody is truly objective, but what we can try and do is examine our own feelings and ask, why am I having a strong emotional reaction to this? If someone came up to you and just started saying things that were complete idiocy, really, truly crazy or idiotic, there's purple Martians, about to attack the planet, you wouldn't have an emotional reaction to that, would you?
No,
if they were truly crazy, if they were truly just insane, you're unlikely to have that emotional reaction. So there's something about what that person is saying that is valid to you. That's why you're having that emotional reaction. But very rarely do we actually sit down and try and examine why am I feeling this way, and where is that feeling coming from?
How might we apply this into our lives, dealing with fear and overcoming fear?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fear is one of the biggest barriers, I believe, to most people achieving their true desires and goals and happiness in life. And I can only say what I've found successful. I think a lot of fears are phantoms. We fear things and without actually testing and validating that they're truly there, truly exist. I think one way that I have found, I think a lot of people think if I want to do this thing in my life, it's got to be a huge leap. I got to make a jump. And sometimes, very often, those things are not a binary. You jump off a cliff to make a change. You can test your change test those things in small ways. I'll just give you an example from my own life. I was terrified of the idea of going out on my own, freelancing, starting a company. That was something that was pretty scary to me. But it's not so scary to make a business card with your name on it. This is not a lot of money to put that, together. This is probably, pre-websites. This is really before websites existed. But thinking about it today, it wouldn't be that crazy to actually put a website up. And you can actually often do things in a small incremental ways. And it turns out I didn't actually start a company by quitting my day job and going into a company full time. I reduced my hours at work. I started taking more part-time. I started taking on other things. It actually ended up being a pretty gradual transition for me, going from being employed to self-employed. It wasn't like one thing stopped and the other started. So I think often there's a way to, you don't have to overcome I think we can become paralyzed by large fears, but I do think it's possible to break them down into small fears and small steps. And if you start taking that big thing that you're afraid of, and you start breaking it down and ask yourself truly, okay, what is the step I can take in that direction? What is the small step that I can take in the direction of that fear? Uh, and then you could you start to build confidence. You take that step, and nothing bad happens, and then you can take another step. I think that's probably the way that I've done it. I taught students in art school. I taught in a visual communications program at Washington University in St. Louis. And one of the things that students, as you can imagine, an art student's primary deliverable out of their college education is a portfolio of their work. And you can imagine how terrifying that might be to take your work that you've slaved over and worked over and take it out to people who are very likely going to destroy it, right?
Sure.
You're going to take it out to say, I would like to be hired by you to do some work. Let me show you what I can do. And very likely the stuff that's going to come out of the creative director, art director's mouth is going to be criticism. And so I noticed that my students would do everything to avoid that criticism. And this is where belief or rationalization or whatever you want to call it comes in. Well, it's not ready yet. It's not perfect yet. I'm not ready to take it out. I need to work on it some more before I can actually go to an interview. And the thing is that, and the question that I would ask them is it going to be more emotionally difficult to take it out now when it's rough and when you're still working on it? Or is it going to be more emotionally difficult to take it out and show people once you think it's perfect? I mean, which is the more fragile situation for you? Why not take it out? Why not even just go out before you've even started a portfolio, or go out when you have sketches and get some feedback on those before you've invested every bit of your heart and soul into this? Take it out there and ask people what, for criticism when you're more able to take it, when something's a little bit less of a scary thing. I think that's true with a lot of things. You can think about writing a book or whatever it is that you want to do in your life. You want to be an actor, you want to write a book, you want to get up on a stage and talk. You can have these goals, and the longer you put them off, the scarier they get. What's the quick and easy way? Well, maybe I'll stand up in a restaurant and toast my brother on his birthday, and make a toast before I get up on a stage and try and do a TED talk. Like there are often ways that you can step into that fear, and there are sort of mental tricks that you can use to reduce your personal risk, your emotional risk. Maybe you talk to a group that it's a group you don't care what they think. Maybe you go in and give a speech to at the nursing home. I think there are lots of ways to. I do think fear is the thing that stands in most people's way. Fear of losing a job, fear of damaging a relationship, fear of whatever those things might be. But I think that I've always lived by the maxim: when in doubt, go towards the fear. If you are in doubt about any major decision in your life, there's going to be a path that's more comfortable and a path that maybe causes you to feel uncomfortable. And if you are hesitating, that's a very good sign that the uncomfortable path is the right path, because if you're going to have a natural tendency or bias to go towards the comfortable route. So if you're even at a point where you're hesitating and you're contemplating the uncomfortable route, it's probably the way you should go. It's probably the right way to go.
So you mentioned that to take the big fear and break it down into smaller fear. And I know from my own personal experience in the past that fear has sort of caused this paralysis. How do you go about, or how do you personally go about, and maybe you could share with us so we could learn for ourselves, that how to break that down? Because sometimes you're so focused on the bigger picture that you just don't move, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you're bringing up fear, because just recently I was visiting my mom and dad for the holidays, and my dad made this point to me and saying, if I look at, he actually made the point to me that I seem pretty fearless. He looked at all the decisions I've made in my life, and that he felt that a lot of the successes I have had been due to fearlessness. And I don't think of myself as a fearless person at all. I don't think of myself as a tremendously courageous person. So it did get me thinking, what is it that I have done? I've always been personally driven by certain kinds of work that I really enjoy, and wanting to find those kinds of jobs. I do think that when you're not taking, it's hard to be afraid when you're doing something, when you're actually taking an action. Usually the fear is before the action. I used to be very terrified of getting up on a stage. And then, I have gotten advice from other speakers and people, and like one of the advice was just to take deep breaths. And this is a simple thing, but deep breaths are a way to tell your body to relax. I mean, you can't talk to your body in English. You have to talk to your body in a language that your body understands. Your dinosaur brain, or your lizard brain, some people call it, understands. And one of the things that will, it's kind of like they say, if you smile, you will start feeling happier. And it's true. If you take deep breaths, you will start feeling calmer. It's simply happens. And it's one of those things that I had to learn. And of course, when you're terrified, it's not the thing that you think is going to help. It doesn't seem like it would help. Then you do it, and it does help. Another thing that someone told me about speaking is, well, if you have energy, then if you can channel that anxiety into positive energy, maybe you walk around, or you pace, or you shout, that you find ways to maybe trick your body in saying you're feeling. Because in a lot of ways, when you feel anxious, it's very similar to the feeling of feeling very excited about something physically. So if you're feeling anxious, you can trick yourself by telling yourself that you're not anxious. You're just really excited. Does that sound strange?
No, not at all.
You've talked to people about fear all the time. You have had a lot of conversations on this topic. I can only tell you the things that have worked for me. I think, sometimes, whether it's fear, sometimes it's depression too, that, and a lot of times that comes from inaction, a feeling that you're not doing something. Sometimes I think you just have to get started doing something. I remember I was in a point in my life where I was feeling really down, and I didn't know why. And I talked to a friend of mine over Skype, and he told me a story of a guy, another artist, who had been, he just got, as a gift, I think, he got some carving tools. And he just started carving. He didn't know what he was carving. He just started carving pieces of wood. He started, carving away at it. And now he's a really famous sculptor. He hadn't sculpted anything before. He didn't really have anything in mind when he started. And what my friend said to me was, sometimes you just need to stop thinking and start doing. And I think that's a really powerful thought. And the next day after having that conversation, I just sat down at my desk and I pulled out a sheet of paper and I just started drawing. I didn't even know what I was drawing. I just started drawing. And I think there's something very powerful. Your body has a lot of the answers to the questions that your mind is asking. And if you are, you're not going to answer those questions by thinking sometimes. You can't think your way into a new way of acting, but you can act your way into a new way of thinking.
That's actually a really great way to put it, and I agree wholeheartedly. Dave, if someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm pretty easy to find. You can, I'm on, my books are on Amazon. I'm on Twitter. You can message me on Twitter. I have a website that's pretty easy to find from my Twitter page. The website has a contact form. I think that's how you found me, Billy. There's a contact form on liminalthinking.com. I try and make it pretty easy for me for people to connect with me. I do monitor Twitter pretty actively, so if people tweet at me, I usually have a reply.
Would you have any parting advice for us today?
Yeah, I have one thing that I think people that's very useful, especially if you're feeling stuck or you're feeling like you want to see change happen in your life. And that is to turn off your autopilot. We have, all of us, and we were only able to function really because of this thing that is sometimes called autopilot, right? Autopilot is you have a way that you drive to work, so you drive that way, and while you're driving to work, you don't have to think about it because you're on autopilot. Your body knows how to get there. When you're washing the dishes or doing your chores, your mind can be elsewhere because you've done these things enough times that you don't have to pay attention. But one of the problems with autopilot is that when you're on autopilot, you're not going to be open to change in your life. And we have autopilot routines, not just in things like driving to work and doing the dishes and our chores. We have autopilot routines in terms of our interactions with other people, our husbands and wives, our brothers, our mothers, our colleagues at work. And as long as you're on autopilot, nothing's going to change because you can't change the past. Everybody knows that you can't change the past. The future doesn't exist yet. The only place and time that it's possible to create change is in the present moment. And if you're on autopilot, you're not in the present moment. You are somewhere else. You are mentally somewhere else. You're thinking about the past or you're thinking about the future. The more you can pay attention to the present moment, the more you can create change in your life, even in areas where you don't think there is likely to be change. And by turning off your autopilot, you don't even have to know what you're going to do. Let's just think about it this way. If you had an autopilot way of going to work and all you did was shut off the autopilot and said, I'm not going to go that way, merely by going any other way, it's going to force you to pay attention to what's going on around you because you haven't done it before. You don't have an autopilot for that. So a tricky way to trick yourself into paying attention and bringing yourself back to the moment is simply to shut off your autopilot, to think, okay, what's my autopilot in this situation? And I'm not going to do that. I won't do that. I'm going to do something else. That's my parting thought for you.
Thank you so much for that. That's actually, that's really good advice. And I want to thank you, Dave, too, for coming on the show today, especially because I know you're fighting a cold. So I really appreciate you taking the time and to share all your knowledge.
Thanks for having me, Billy. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.